Podcasters Roundtable round 500. Dave, we made it, man.
We made it, buddy.
What are we, like 16 years old? No, I'm kidding. That was Dave's idea. What number? 153. Yeah, Dave said make up a random number, so 500 it is. We're ancient. We're as old as podcasting, which we know is 20 years old. But we'll get into that. If that number is making your head go weird, we'll get in that. But who pays for podcasts? That's the name of this round, and we'll get into that too and why it's called that. Co-host Dave Jackson, welcome back, man.
Glad to be here, Ray. Dave Jackson from the schoolofpodcasting.com.
Awesome. And new roundtablers both, I think. John, welcome to the roundtable, your first roundtable.
Ray, it's good to be here. I'm looking forward to the 500 show episode t-shirts we'll be getting in the mail in a couple weeks after being part of this. I am the host of the Bridge Sports Podcast and the now new report, Old Report, which I kind of evolved from my previous podcast at londonbridge.com.
Very cool. And other new roundtabler, York, welcome, man.
Hey, welcome. This is York Campbell from the Poetic Earthlings Podcast. It's an audio drama, short audio dramas. So it's good to be here. It's good to see my arch enemy. I'm not sure if you guys know this, that Dave Jackson is my arch enemy because I was on. Yeah. He's my. I was on one of his shows and I got the big X on one of his shows. So
I don't know, yeah. It was this.
Was this like a rodeo show, Dave, or something?
Yeah. So
And
I'm kind of intimidated right now because he's right here.
What we've learned is Dave is not a fan of fiction, but basically in general. I'm a very nonfiction kind of guy, and so that's what I told him. I said, York, I'm just not your target audience, buddy.
You just, Dave, do you just give bad ratings to all fiction shows?
I try, I really do, but fiction shows have a lot of backstory. You start off a lot with and I'm like, let's get to the action, let's go. And they always start off with a lot of backstory, and I am not patient enough for that. So.
Well, the good thing about when I was on Dave's show is that he taught me a couple of things, and I did implement it into my podcast. So that was good, even though I got the X on his show, but I was fine.
Well, the other thing you always got to remember is, for the one guy behind the mic that might not be a fan of fiction shows, there's probably hopefully 300 that are like, oh, that was why did you give him the X? I like that. Hit more of it. So,
it's always good to be controversial. It's like sometimes that can be good. So I'm saying it's always good, but it might have drove more listeners because you didn't like it. People are like, well, you know what? I'm going to check it out. I want to see what Dave's talking about.
Yeah.
Who knows? No press, bad press, something like that. However the saying is.
There's no such thing as bad press.
All right. Hey, Daniel's in the chat, so he's co-hosting from the chat tonight. Daniel's going to moderate, give us the good questions. Although his kid will probably pull him away.
Right.
That's what those kids and their need for attention.
They're so selfish.
Seriously, don't they know we're podcasting? Come on, kids. All right. Hey, who pays for podcasts? Let's get to the first story. York, you have this one in here, Apple Podcast subscriptions, but I already subscribe in Apple Podcast. Yeah. So what is this about?
All right. So what they're doing is, for Apple wants to, I guess help out the podcasters. I would like to think that they want to help them out by saying, if you subscribe to the show, if anyone subscribes to my show, then it's sort of like a paywall where you put a little bit of money into Poetic Earthlings podcast, my show. And so the podcaster gets paid, which in theory, it's not that bad. It's not too bad. But at the same time, people are used to podcasts being free. So I'm not sure if this is really going to work. It's good in a way if it does work, so we could cut out the middle guy. We could cut out the traditional advertisers. We could do our own thing. Our listeners will directly support us, which would be remarkable. So, I mean, in theory, it's nice, but again, would this really bring in the dollars for independent guys such as me? So, it's up for debate.
Well, the other fun thing is, in my travels with Apple, they take 30% like,
Right.
which is 3 times as much as a Patreon or somebody else. And the reason they can do that is because they're Apple. Everything in Apple land is expensive. Don't believe me? Go buy another pair of $500 headphones.
This is actually different than what I thought. I thought they were this was like a premium model for Apple Podcasts, right? So is it like Spotify where it'll have exclusive shows? We don't know, right? Isn't this pretty much just rumor and something I think people have been talking about a long time, but
yeah, I don't think it's going to be exclusive shows. I think this is going to be more open for almost everyone. I don't think they're going to go like the Joe Rogan type of exclusive. I believe that everyone could sign up for Apple, but is there a fee? Who knows? There may be a podcast. Maybe as a podcaster, you have to put some money into it, but I don't know exactly how that's going to work.
Yeah, well, if there's anything we know about Apple, and I could just hold up my new XR phone and show you guys that there's now no headphone jack in the bottom of it, because Apple just decided there wasn't going to be a headphone jack in the new phones, and we just had to go along with getting the new technology to move with them. The unfortunate thing with Apple, as Dave mentioned, is if they want to do something, they'll probably just go ahead and do it, and most people will just conform to it because it's Apple. But I couldn't see myself paying a similar subscription to what I do for, say, watching different cable programs or subscribing to Hulu or Netflix or those sorts of things, because there are already outlets audio-wise that you could already get for free. I don't know if they'd be wise to kind of jump that ship first and say, well, here's a $5 subscription and you can get these podcasts here, but you can't get these other ones there. You need a subscription for it. It would be interesting. It would be a bold move for sure for them to do something like that, just because of where the market currently is, where we can get our podcasts at so many different outlets now.
And that's the key too, right? Like, I think I read about it in Hot Pot or something. There was a good quote because it said audiences haven't sufficiently expressed interest in that kind of relationship with podcasts. Examples being Stitcher Premium and the infamous Luminary. Something we are used to getting free. These aren't really working. And I just read, well, maybe it's in here. We're going to talk about Spotify and their podcast. This will be John. You'll have it. So even Spotify is, we have a story later that's indicating that podcasts aren't working out for Spotify in terms of profit or what they'd hope it would do for their platform or advertising or anything like that. So we just haven't seen it work. And you have to wonder, would any revenue, even if it worked enough, what is that to Apple's bottom line? Like, why are they doing it? Right? It's not for the podcaster. Is it really? It's got to be some play to keep podcasters on their platform, maybe not go exclusive somewhere else. I don't know, but it can't be. It doesn't seem like anything is going to turn into massive money, and it's a drop in a bucket for Apple's bottom line. So
it's gonna be a hard sell. This reminds me of one of my favorite podcasters. I used to listen to their shows all the time. Then they went paywall only, and then I thought, well, should I give these guys $7-10 per month? I said no. There wasn't even a free version of it. So I'm not sure if a whole bunch of other listeners pulled out when they did that, but it's a gamble.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that, because I like that point, and these stories are always just a point to jump off and then talk about stuff that affects us as podcasters on a daily basis. Have any of you considered, like, that's a model we've seen, right? Start a podcast and then maybe do some premium offer, whether it's your own app. Dave, you guys still have apps that podcasters can get, right? And that can be premium. But in that case, you typically have to, the podcast that you're currently producing, anything that's going to be paid for after kind of needs to be bonus or additional content. You're putting yourself in a spot where you have to create more, right? It seems crazy that they just put it all behind. Like, you're just going to lose so many people, you would think. And I'm sure they found that out, but.
Yeah, I'm totally, exactly.
That's one of those, if there isn't any free, then how does somebody know what they're buying? You know what I mean? It's like, even when you buy a car, you get to go on a test run. So, if there's no test drive, you're just like, nope, $7, hope you like it. It's like, I don't know that that's going to work, I know on, there's a website, Graphtreon, that shows the top patrons, and you can actually filter it by podcast. And the one is Chapo Trap House. and they make $172,000 a month. A
Wow.
month. That's nuts. And what they do is they do 2 episodes that are free and 2 episodes that are not, and it's $5. And they have 38,000 patrons and some. So, and from what I just talked with Jack from the Dark Knight Diaries, and he did a deep dive into Patreon, and he said the biggest thing that most people do, it's bonus content, because that's what your audience wants. Hey, I like this. Can I get more of this? Sure. It's, $5-10, whatever it is. So,
which is really tough because now it's hard enough to get the regular podcast out. Now you've just created additional work for yourself. So, it is helpful to know about that going in, to think a little bit about, what do I want to accomplish? And if one of those things is making money, you better think of what that model is going to be ahead of time. Now, a lot of people start a podcast, they just want to start a podcast, which is fantastic. But, and you can, it may have worked for some people to go paywall only, or you got to buy our app or something. I don't know. And again, based on those goals, maybe you lose a third of your audience, but if the rest pay, maybe that's worth it for you. So it's definitely things to think about when you want to get into to getting money. Patreon's one way. And this again is interesting to me because I don't understand how your listener would give money for your podcast, or it would go to you. I missed that part of the article.
Yeah. From what I gather is that the money goes to the podcaster, to the content creator, right? And so, and probably Apple gets a part of that. That wasn't included in the article that I read. They made it very straightforward. They said that it's a possibility that podcasters, they'll get paid. So the only way, I guess, that the listeners could enjoy or watch or view or watch their show, listen to their show, is through this way, through this method.
And then Baderberg here says, I'm not sure, Apple needs stuff for their Apple CarPlay. After splitting iTunes and creating the worst podcast player, they need content, something to keep the competition away. And I mean, this is what you see from these platforms competing over people to be on their platform, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they've got the TV Plus. I don't know, it'd be interesting to see what they do with this, because I'm not sure the whole paywall. Well, it's like you said, we're not sure between Luminary and even going back to the one British comedian that laughs a lot, created The Office, Ricky Gervais.
Oh yeah,
he was one of the original guys that tried to put his podcast behind a paywall, and that was a huge just flop, because that's back when they were trying to put DRM, digital rights management, so you couldn't share it with people. But that didn't work either.
Mark Maron does it successfully, doesn't he? Because he was on Libsyn, and he had the app, and you got, what did you get? More content in the app is what it was?
The way Mark had it set up, you can go into Libsyn and say, okay, make the last blank free. So I think in Mark's case, it was the last 50 were free. But if you wanted, like, his first 20 episodes were
the back catalog.
Yeah. So, and it was and he was making some bank on that. But yeah, so now
is he still with that model? Do you know?
I don't, to be honest with you. I don't know if if we still have his app. I know he moved to whatever it is, Stitcher Pro or whatever, but I don't know if we were still doing the app thing for him or not.
Interesting. John, you've gone from, you're making money in podcasting, but how are you doing that?
I'm not making money in podcasting.
All right.
I wish I was.
I thought you transitioned to paid. I thought you were.
Well, I'm making money, thankfully, in a paid radio position at Sirius XM. So there
you go.
There you go.
Kind of more into getting a job with Sirius. So I can never speak badly of podcasting, but I think it is interesting, the pay part of it, because for me, it's always sort of been, I'd rather have my listeners hear me than have them pay me to hear me, because I don't think they would pay me. I don't even know if my family would pay, say, $5 a month to listen to my podcast episodes, because for whatever reason, the millennial generation, I think, got spoiled growing up in the days of Napster, of LimeWire, where our music was there. We just had to kind of go find it. And now you hear people who buys music anymore from the Apple Store? You find it, you pilfer it off YouTube, you throw an MP3 in. I mean, I'm not recommending this, kids. Go out and be responsible. Get that gift card from grandma around Christmas time and go on the iTunes store with $50 on it. But it's the same thing for podcasting. We think we could just go elsewhere to find this content. Sometimes I think, who would I be willing to even pay for? Even the biggest names in the business, like Dan Lebitard, for example, just left ESPN and is kind of being a pirate ship on his own. Well, would I pay $10 to listen to Dan's content? Would he provide enough bonus content, as you mentioned, Dave, that would be worthy of me throwing money down on? And maybe I would consider it, but it's also an example of, can I hear it first? Can there be a free trial, per se, for a month or so to kind of get a feel for what you guys are doing? And maybe I'd consider paying for it. I just think now, with so many even different companies that were solely just music getting into the podcasting, that might be their thing. Hey, come on over to Pandora. Come on over to Spotify. You don't have to pay for Apple. It's interesting, Apple, too, being the stalwart of podcasting, they got so far ahead of the game because they were the only game in town, really. It was listen to my podcast on Apple Podcasts, and nobody knew of a lot of other sources where you could get them. It was, oh, what's this? What's Stitcher? What's etc.? And I don't know if they've really improved based on where they started from. There hasn't been major rollouts for us to say, wow. I remember a couple of years ago when they finally, you had to go through a couple steps. You could finally see when people were just listening to your show, when they would stop listening and start listening. And that was their big rollout. It's like, well, what took you so long, man? We've been doing this for a decade plus. Now, all of a sudden, we could finally see when people are listening. It's unfortunate that they're kind of behind the game, although they're so far ahead of the game. So I don't know if they're just trying to do something with this. It's like, well, we haven't made any moves in the however many years it's been. We need to do something to keep up. I just hope they're smart with it, because if it's you need to pay X number of dollars to get any of our content, I don't think anybody's going to stick with that.
Yeah, Apple has the most confusing listening, I think, than any app at this point, because they completely ignore episodic artwork unless you look at their website version of Apple Podcasts. Then your links aren't clickable unless you're subscribed to the show. So there's the search view and the library view. That drives me bonkers. And it's the search view that's always about 24 hours behind. But if you subscribe, everything is there. And it's just always, as a person that works in support in podcasts, they bring me a lot of job security. So I should thank them for that, and thank them for all the years of that they have really helped podcasts. But their app is, I remember the reason I use Overcast is they broke their app to where it wouldn't even work. And I was like, oh, I need something else. And I found Overcast and have never, ever gone back. So they need to
a lot of initial movement probably goes to Apple. One thing you pretty much guaranteed that if it's a podcast, it's on Apple. So it's all there, right? Where you might not be able to find your favorite podcast on Spotify because your podcaster didn't know how to submit to Spotify, right? So that could push you into two apps or away from one app. So yeah, they've got the market. I mean, someone I think in that same newsletter was saying that, Apple's sort of propped up the industry for a long time and had such a big lead, and then they see everyone else making money, maybe, and so why shouldn't they? But again, important to note, all speculation. No one knows this. This is not coming from Apple. These are people guessing this might happen.
Well, and the other thing to think about is, on one hand, Spotify goes around and starts making all these moves, and you're like, well, why didn't Apple make those moves? Well, maybe Apple knows something that Spotify doesn't. And I know people now are starting to question Spotify. I don't know that Spotify made bad moves. I think they overpaid for some stuff. That's I think probably the more accurate one of like, oh, did they make the wrong move? Probably not. Did they pay too much for this stuff? I think that's what we're going to find out. Because when they say it's not profitable, I'm like, well, yeah, if you pay too much for stuff, you're going to have to wait for that to whatever it is, where the price comes up in value after you've lived in a house for a while. I'm like, well, maybe after the podcasting space continues to grow, you'll be like, oh yeah, that's actually now valuable. So we'll see.
It's Dave doing his co-host role and transitioning us to the next story. So John, since he just led you right into that one, what's this Spotify story you have here?
It'd be a good tease. If you have any commercials you got to get rid of, Roy, throw them in now. Well, the Spotify Buy-a-palooza, I guess you want to say, for 2019, Ray, was just them getting Gimlet Media, Anchor, and Parcast, and then bringing other shows exclusively to them. The Ringer moved to Spotify, and the big one, obviously, was Joe Rogan's podcast. Goodness me, that couple week period where will all his episodes be available? Are they taking certain ones off depending on the content? They were all over the news for not necessarily the right reasons. They have a couple other ones, like Michelle Obama has podcasts on there, Kim Kardashian West. But from the early numbers, I guess after the first year or so of this venture, they're not where people want to see them, people being the higher ups that care about those sorts of numbers. And I wonder if it's a long game type of purchase that they made, where they're hopeful that if they stick with this long enough, either the younger generation will go to the Spotify route based on what they have, or the generation even behind them will start going to the Spotify route based on what they have. Because I don't know what the younger generation is listening to as far as podcasting is concerned. I don't know if it's just we're TikTok people, we're never going to get into podcasting, or who's going to be the stalwart of podcasting for that TikTok generation? Who's going to be the Joe Rogan that can get behind a microphone and have these kids, teenagers, young adults listen to their shows? I don't know if it's worthy of saying that it's been a failure or that they're going down the wrong path quite yet. I think it's definitely something they're going to have to wait and see how it plays out. But I'm sure that they thought in the early going it was going to be a lot more exciting. And unfortunately, it's taken a little while for this to all catch up with them. I would agree that maybe they spent a little bit too much in the early going, because they really put their chips on the table to get a couple different outlets and shows to come with them. And as of now, I mean, for a lot of people that I talk to, and I don't speak for polls or for the numbers that we're going to see in different articles to answer these questions, but pretty much everybody I talk to uses Spotify for music. They pay the subscription, they listen to the music. They're not concerned with the podcasting aspect of Spotify. They're only using it for that one outlet. And I don't know if we're sort of just in the habit of going to our specific apps for their specific purposes still, even though they're trying to get back into the game. I think it's going to take a while for somebody to think, all right, Spotify, I can get my podcast. I can get my, maybe even radio shows will end up there someday. They just think Spotify, music, Apple podcasts. Pandora, they're going to give me music as well. I don't know if it's going to take a little bit of time for people to just get into their heads. It's kind of like reteaching yourself that, oh, wow, everything is here and I can just go to my favorite app. So I think they could wait it out and probably benefit from it. But unfortunately, the people paying the bills are going to look at what's coming in and say, this isn't working right now. We might have to change what we're doing.
I think with Spotify, they need to change their app. I mean, I'm a big podcast listener, and I tried Spotify. The app itself is insufficient. Perhaps what they should do, I'm just thinking about it right now as you're talking, John. If they have a separate app called Spotify Podcast, something to that effect, take some insight from Pocketcast, from Overcast, these people that really know what they're doing. And people may be more intrigued to subscribe or to follow. Right now, as it stands, I hardly listen to Spotify for podcast because it's just a minefield. It's hard to organize it. At least for me, it is. They have a follow button. They don't have a subscribe button. It's a little bit of a mess. So yeah. So if Spotify were to hear this or listen to me, I would definitely suggest that.
But what they're doing, instead of investing in the listener, they're investing in how can we make money on this thing. They're buying Megaphone. They're taking some of those shows that were exclusive, like Michelle Obama, which Adam Curry was talking about this on the No Agenda show. He goes, it's interesting because they have all this inventory. They've sold all this stuff. And he goes, they don't have enough shows that are getting the giant numbers to put it on. He goes, so what do? You buy Megaphone because they've got a bunch of ways to advertise outside of Spotify, because that's the one nice thing that Spotify has done is like, look, we find a better way to put advertisements in front of you. Come to this platform. I don't know too many listeners that are like, oh, wait, more ads? Oh, I'll be right there. You know, it's like, so that's kind of interesting. But if you think about it, Amy Schumer started off exclusive and now she's, as far as I know, not. Michelle Obama was exclusive, and now she's not. So it'll be interesting to see. You would think Joe has to stay exclusive because Joe's, to the best of my knowledge, Joe is keeping his advertising money. So he's just given the rights to, be there, hoping that people will come over to listen to him.
Well, from this article too, we have to remember what the important play for Spotify, I think, is, and it's to get people to listen to less music, which is ironic, right? We created a music platform. Can you listen less? Because they talk about being dependent on music labels, right? So they want to free themselves a bit from that. And so the more podcasts they can get you to listen to, because they're not paying us, at least us, the regular indie podcaster, most podcasters, that shifts money away from having to pay licensing fees for music. So, and welcome to podcasting, Spotify. It is a long game. So but when you have investors and venture capital and all these other things, people breathing down your neck and they want results real fast. But that, I think to get results in this space, like you're saying, John, they're going to have to be a little patient. But the question is, can they be patient? I mean, given all the money they've spent, you would think you got to give it its time. But yeah, we'll see.
Oh, Ray, this is the same thing you and Dave and Daniel have been telling listeners of the show since you guys started it. It's relax. It's the long run for podcasts. You're not going to get 5,000 listeners for your first show. You're not going to get it in your first 10 shows. It's going to take some time for these things to work out. And I'm sure there's a lot of people at Spotify that feel the same way. But as you mentioned, when it's the wrong people breathing down your neck, they're not going to care that, well, wait a while, we're going to get the listeners that we want to see. No, we want results now. We want to see.
What's interesting too is that it's not even a numbers play in terms of listeners. It's how much time the subscribers for each show spend listening to the podcast. It's like, can you get your listener to come back every week and listen for an hour? Again, about shifting that time away from music. If you can get more people to listen to more episodes, like I don't even think that you need more listeners if you can get the current listeners to listen more, right? To podcasts, even if they find other podcasts inside Spotify. They're like, oh, I listened to the Podcasters Roundtable. Now I'm going to go listen to music. Oh, no, I'm not. I'm going to go listen to Dave because I found Dave on Podcasters Roundtable too. So there's a couple different things they could do to up that time. And I would think that would make it worth it because, again, I think their goal is to shift that time away to content they don't have to pay for.
Yeah. And Adam Curry was talking about this, and he said, if you want to, I don't know if you can put Dan's comment on the screen there. Pocketcast, I believe, was owned by NPR, and now they're kind of been kicked to the curb. Todd and Rob on the New Media Show were saying how those guys are just spending gazillions of dollars, apparently on a team of developers the size of Texas. Why you need that, I don't know. But Adam was saying that, he goes, if we can't get people to come to Spotify, he goes, it'll be interesting to see if Spotify starts buying apps. Because all right, if you're not going to come to us, if you're not going to come to our platform, we'll just buy the platform you're listening to, because apparently they got a lot of money, so I'm sure Marco's going to hear a knock on the door. Hello, Marco. Yes. Aren't you the owner of Overcast? What kind of check do you need? I think Dan got into the show notes, because this story is actually in, it's in my show notes, and it's not much here other than, as you mentioned, Dave, Pocketcast, my personal favorite that I've used since I've always listened to podcasts. I think ever since I've used an app to listen to podcasts, it's been Pocketcast. And to York's point, I like the UI. It's always look the best and function the best for me. So, and it's in Dave, when Rob lists off those numbers in the feed, the podcast for Libsyn. Yeah.
Pocketcast has been one of the very few that's had decent percentage of listenership. Now it's nothing compared to Apple. It's like a 3% maybe, but I mean, that's significant in a world where Apple Podcast dominates the apps, right? So anyways, NPR bought it, which we were all, as a listener, I was kind of worried about it, because they had NPR One, they had their own app, and what would happen? Would we start getting ads, or, they really left it alone. And I think they were trying to do what you're talking about, that Spotify might use this. It didn't work for them to get more people over to the NPR content, I guess, or maybe it was trying to convert. Kind of a weird play.
Yeah.
and that's my question is what is the value of a podcast app? And Dave, I think you're kind of alluding to it, is that in this case, you could sort of just buy a listener base.
Yeah, but you still have to. I mean, if somebody bought, if somebody went to Marco and said, hey, here's a giant check for Overcast, that's still not going to make me listen to it. You know what I mean? Like I remember when Amy Schumer came out, and I like her TV show, her podcast was horrendous.
Yeah, but I'm saying, so Pocketcast is theoretically up for sale, and I think the idea that Spotify, like that sounds logical to me. Like Spotify just buys Pocketcast, and then what do they? What's the deal there? Is it ads, or are they going to try to pull people over from? Would you buy it to destroy it or something? I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like what's the value in, if Pocketcast was expensive and it didn't work for NPR, why would anyone else buy it?
Well, maybe you buy it to get the team to go, okay, look, our podcast listening experience on our app is crap right now. You guys seem to know, podcast user interface is pretty good.
Well, there goes York's solution, right? Buy the Pocketcast team and make your app good, right?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Maybe Pocketcast becomes the Spotify podcast app, right? Don't do that, please.
Yeah.
All right, I was waiting for you to put a bid in. That's what I thought you were going to tell us today, because I know you've been a Pocketcast guy since the inception of it.
John, if you could go ahead and reach into your pocket there and just how much money you got there.
Well, the nice thing about that app is it's one of the few that's cross-platform. So you could have Pocketcast on your Android phone and then basically log into Pocketcast on an iPad and pick up right where you left off. That's one of the cool things about that particular.
I listen to it in the browser when I'm sitting here doing work. I'll upload not much, but I love that functionality because if I am on my desktop, I will listen.
Yeah.
Hey, by the way, it's one of my favorite. It's one of my favorite as well. I listen to Pocketcast. I listen to all of my episodes on that, other people's episodes on that. It's just a really good user interface.
Yeah. One recurring issue that is a really weird issue, and it can't be just isolated to me because it's happened over several phones. If you're listening to an episode and you pause or you go out, I think, and you switch, I always forget what triggers it. When you come back, like it will not play sometimes. Like it won't play. I have to like close the app, but it's one bug that I've noticed like over its entirety. And it's always been kind of an enigma to me. But other than that, it's been my favorite. And podcast apps are like banks and telephone companies. Everyone has a favorite and everyone hates the one that you like, right? Like there's plenty of people who hate it and plenty of people who love it. So it's always an interesting topic.
Well, and that kind of leads to the story I picked from Eric Newsom. And he was saying, what is the value of a platform? Because people are getting big bucks to go to their platform. And he was saying that basically there are two things. You either, you should either extend your reach, right? So you're going to grow your audience, or you're going to get paid. Because in the case of Joe Rogan, he got paid a lot, and he actually, I think, probably shrunk his audience maybe a little bit. And that's where I thought that's a really good point, because if you think about it, if somebody came, hey, exclusive to Amazon Music now, it's, whatever, the Bill Burr podcast.
The Roundtable.
Yeah, the Podcasters Roundtable. It's not like there's a ton of people listening to podcasts on Amazon right now. We don't know yet. The numbers are probably still coming in, but it's not like, and I use the analogy because I'm old, but from what I understand from comedians like Seinfeld and all these other guys, if you went on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, so that's like 2 hosts ago on the Tonight Show, you would literally walk down the street the next day and everybody like, hey, I saw you on Johnny last night. Like it made a career. You became an overnight success after working in clubs for 10 years or whatever. And I don't know that there is such a thing here. I don't know that any of these apps are going to be like, oh, wow, my podcast is going to go to exclusive to, Overcast or whatever. I don't know that there is a platform now to make, I mean, Libsyn had a podcast on the front page of Apple Podcasts, with those big rectangles at the top. And we got, hundreds of downloads, not thousands.
Wait, what show was that?
It was a show they did years ago called Thanks Podcasting.
What?
And
this was a Libsyn podcast?
It was a Libsyn podcast. It sounded a lot like Because of My Podcast Stories, but that would accuse them of ripping off something. But no, this is before I worked there. So this was probably 6 years ago. And they came up with Thanks Podcasting. and it was all around Thanksgiving, and it came out, and you would start iTunes because it was iTunes back then, and there it was, this big old rectangle thing, blah blah blah, things podcasting, stories of podcasters, and yada yada yada. And Ask Elsie, she was kind of like, it didn't really do much.
I think the key there is like you can't be a one-time promo. Like if Spotify brings you on, and they're saying they're going to bring you on because you're a sensation. You're I don't want to forget the girl, the young lady at the inauguration, Amanda Gorman, I think is her name, the poet who one reading of a poem, and she is insta famous, right? Because she was put on the national stage. And so if they pick her up, the key is that they keep telling people, hey, this is here, this is here, this is here, right? So they could create that audience for you, but they'd have to invest in you, right? So one time on Apple Podcasts, not so much. But if Apple decided to keep pushing you through their channels and you were good, you had to be good, that's the key, right? Then you could create someone.
They could turn you into a superstar.
Okay.
Dave's looking for an example where this was tried and didn't work.
Well, yeah, it is, exactly. So I was going to say, of course, you're talking about people like Jim, wrong show. No, I've heard of that guy too. How about David Cook? You know him, he's famous, right? Do you know who David Cook is? Anybody?
No,
David Cook, I'm not sure who that is.
Exactly. Season 7 winner of American Idol.
Oh.
So that's my example of they can put you on a stage and make you famous. I'm sure when he won season 7, or Chris Allen, winner of season 8, or Lee DeWise of season 9, and of course Scott McCreery. Who doesn't remember Scott McCreery? I don't, of season 10. So there's a big platform. It takes more than a big giant spotlight for a second to make you.
Like I said, if the singer sucks, they were probably good. I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure all of those exposures led to something for those people, though.
Well, I'm sure they have. I mean, and there have been like 4 or 5. Carrie Underwood sings football songs every Monday or Sunday or whatever, and the one guy's in Queen, and Kelly Clarkson has her own TV show. So there are, but again, that kind of requires some luck and that little thing. What did you mention, Ray? Talent? Yeah, that would be helpful as well.
If we only had some of that here, we would be famous.
We'd be great, man.
Super great. All right. Hey, we're zooming through the stories. That's not sponsored. It's not it. That's a different way to use it. There's all kinds of ways to use the word zoom now. Apparently, it's a verb. Let's see what else we got. Let's see, York. What's your other story? So back to Apple, I guess. Apple Spotlight. So is this actually what you're doing, or is subscriptions? We don't know.
No. Well, with Apple Spotlight, what they're doing is they're featuring one podcaster that has made a difference, or that I'm not sure if it's going to be a monthly thing or weekly, where they're going to showcase hopefully an independent podcaster, but they didn't say. Now on my show, on the Poetic Earthlings podcast, I have what I call an Earthling Spotlight, and it's where I recognize a writer, science fiction, romantic author, or poet, anyone in the writing community. And so I intentionally bring them on the show, meaning I read some of their works, I advertise their book, I speak about them. So it's a way for me to put a spotlight on independent authors. So Apple is trying to do the same thing with independent, or they didn't say independent, but with podcasters. I think it's a good thing, but I'm not sure of all of the politics behind it. Would they pick a show like John's sports show? Would that be advertised? Would they pick my show, or would it just be the shows that are generating a lot of income from their advertisers? So, but again, the idea is good. We need the recognition. There's a lot of independent podcasters that are working really hard, tirelessly on their craft, and this would be a good way to showcase us. But I don't want to really wait around for that. I'd rather build my shows. I'd rather put the word out for myself and do all the hard work, rather than somebody tapping me on the shoulder and saying, "Hey, York, you know what? you could come on our team. We're going to put the spotlight on you. So that's the danger. That's the danger part of people desperately wanting to be on the Apple spotlight, right?
Yeah.
Rather than them going out and working really hard.
Right. Well, people who get into it to be number one on the chart or new and noteworthy, and then they quit because they don't make bad news. You weren't going to make it. You just weren't going to make it. Like, if these are your motivations, money, fame, like, you picked the wrong thing. Try to get on that American Idol. But this is kind of an interesting transition from what we were just talking about platforms and elevating voices and sort of making something out of quote unquote nothing, right? So yeah, you said they didn't mention independence, but Apple has always featured. Dave, what does it take to be featured right now from Apple? So maybe we have some clues as to what they're going to look for. I mean, your artwork better be good. That's one thing.
Yeah, your artwork has to be good. You have to give them some time too, because they're gonna want to approve any kind of artwork because you need more than your square now. Now you've got to work with them on a rectangle thing. And typically, and this is where things get fun, it has to be somewhat newsworthy. So the fact that it's episode number, 153 or whatever it is, that's not newsworthy, but it's like, hey, Alan Alda is coming on to talk about such and such, or, Kim Kardashian, insert A-list celebrity here, because half the crowd just went, Alan who? Alan what? Come on, Hawkeye from MASH. So, if you have some big, or if it's some big news story, all of a sudden you get to interview the bomber from Nashville, who's going to be hard to interview because last we heard he's, rubble. But something that is newsworthy, that's worthy of the front page, for lack of a better phrase, of Apple. And then if you can give them enough time, they'll approve it because they want to promote it as well. So they want all, Apple, it's got to look pretty. So they got to get all their graphic people to get all the stuff ready. But, and that's per Rob Walsh, from what I understand. You just got to, if you want to get featured in Apple, you got to start working on it months in advance, and you've got to have something pretty big coming on.
It should be part of your prep. Like, you should just be, these are things you should be ready for, right? Like, put a little investment in your show. You want to have good presence anyways, because this is something you can share. This goes beyond, and it just helps to have those, media kits. Those are good things to put together. If you haven't done it, if you have time, you can make a media kit and maybe look, you could certainly find the example of what Apple wants and go ahead and do it ahead of time, not just for Apple, but it can be helpful for anywhere you're sort of displaying your show, right?
Exactly.
But, this is different, right? And we're just kind of talking about what does it take for Apple to feature now, or when they say they want to feature you, what do they ask for? This might be lower threshold. Maybe they're just going to start putting stuff, and I don't know where they're going to do this. I assume just in the app, I guess. But
yeah, I think it's just going to be in the app. I can't see them doing it anywhere else.
Yeah. Well, the whole point is to, I think that they've probably listened to a few roundtables. Actually, you know what? That's not crazy. I know that people at Apple do listen to some of our shows, Dave. But over the years, there's just been a lot of independent podcasters who complain that they can't compete or that they would never get featured. And maybe they're taking some of that and saying, let's see what else is out there doesn't have big backing. And again, we don't know if it's independent. When we say independent, we typically mean there's not someone else investing in your show other than you, right?
They're not thanking the team of 18 at the end. Yeah,
exactly. So we'll see. Is this for sure happening? Do we know? Is this a thing coming out?
No, this is just something that I read. There's no set date for this. They didn't say, okay, at this given time. They just said that they're going to be showcasing independent or better yet, just podcasters on their platform. But again, it may be a great thing. I like the point that you mentioned earlier on, Dave, about what is independent. Now, I'm truly independent. There's only one guy. That's me. I write, produce, I do everything. I don't have a team of engineers. So somebody else could say, well, we're independent. We have a team of 18 engineers, but we're not on a major network. Well, would that be considered independent?
Joe Rogan was independent,
right?
Yeah, he had a team of whatever, 4 maybe, something like that.
Okay.
But
we use the word in podcasting to imply that it's an amateur or self-run show Like it's completely open, right? Like, what is the true meaning of an independent podcaster? That would be hard. That would be hard to define. We use it as a way to talk about most people who are going to be on the roundtable, right? Like, they're at home, they're doing their show. Someone's not paying them. A lot of times, you're not paying them, or you're not making money from your show. Even if you're making money from your show, you're not making kind of money. If you can live off of your podcast, I don't know. I mean, you could still be independent. It's just you, and I'm making enough money. Is Glenn the horse guy? You know, he makes money from his podcast, and it certainly didn't start that way. Is he independent? He's got a network.
He's independent. He has a network.
Independent podcast network.
Yeah. And is he now just a professional podcaster?
I mean, he is that for sure. If he's making a living, if you're making a living, I call myself a professional podcast producer only because someone paid me to do that thing. But before they were paying me, I wasn't a professional, right? So that also implies training. So all these words imply something else. But independent podcaster is an interesting term, because if you asked everyone what an independent podcaster is, everyone would have a different answer. For sure.
I don't know the name of it. I want to say podcast taxonomy, maybe. Some group is working on that. Because we don't know what to call, like, what I say a producer is.
Right.
So I think
go look for podcast producer as a job, and it is not what I have traditionally called a podcast producer, as someone who makes a podcast. What a company wants when they say podcast, they want someone to direct a show, essentially, like line up stories. And John, do you have producers? They probably at Sirius, right? Like, what is your job function?
My job is the associate producer, which is a more professional way to say board op, the guy that moves all the buttons for the show. But when you tell people associate producer, they say, wow, that's a great position. I think they mean that for if a producer is sick or you have to step in, you move into the producer role, and there's no technical jargon.
Because I think that's the kind of podcast producer job that you're going to find. So if you think, oh, I'm a podcast producer, you're not what most of these larger organizations or media companies are actually looking for. What's a producer do at Sirius?
The bullet points that the higher ups would hope a producer would do is book several guests pertinent to whatever's happening in the world of whatever you're looking to talk about, and also provide different articles and different topics for the show that you just sort of present to the host to say, if you would like to go in this direction, we'd love to do that, and sort of direct them. And every show is different, obviously, because some hosts don't look at any of that. They're going to do their own show for however many hours it is. And other hosts sometimes need a little bit of movement to help them along the way. But for what we did coming on to here with you, Ray, today was similar to what a producer would do. Look at a couple articles, read them over, see what you'd like to talk about, and then bring forth that. And you did the role of booking the guests for everybody. So it depends on where you are, but they expect that sort of thing to almost, in a sense, put the show together, outline what you hope the show will be, and then hopefully the host can deliver on filling in those check mark boxes throughout the way. But podcast producing, as you said, depending on where you go for that job, it could mean a myriad of different things. You might think, oh, I'm just going to get a couple guests for the show and throw this guy a couple articles, and then go, oh, hopefully Audition and how to cut audio and put it on the website, and also run our social media account, because that's what we'd like from you as the producer. Oh, okay.
Is that most podcasters do, because they are the social media team, they are the writer, the booker, the talent, they're all those things, right? So if you're a podcaster, you have a lot of skills potentially to sell. And, that's how I talk about making money from a podcast. And that is my route to making money in podcasting. It was not planned, but because of the skills I had taught myself of being a podcaster, I was hired to do that for someone else. Right. And so I've been doing that for like 12 years, getting paid to podcast. I'm not the on air. And John, you seem like you'd be the engineer. I don't know why they call you. Seems like an engineer, but again, semantics, taxonomy, Dave, as you said. So it's interesting.
Yeah. There's actually a website, podcasttaxonomy.com, with a whole bunch of partners. And if you click on white paper, you get a PDF, and you can find out that I thought this was brilliant. It said an associate producer, creative direction in parentheses. The associate producer performs one or more producer functions as delegated to them by a producer. Like, oh, you've made it so crystal clear now exactly what that person does. I don't even see engineer here.
Taxonomy is brutal. You talk to a scientist and they have a special place in a special other place. Taxonomists generally, because it is hard to define things like that. But that's interesting. I'll have to take a look at what they're doing over there.
Yeah.
Awesome. We have what do we have? I think there's more stories in here. John, you have another story, right?
Yeah, the AP put out a story the other day talking broader picture on sort of what's been going on in the social media and regular world as far as companies such as Twitter and Facebook, et cetera, getting rid of some of the more negative voices that were on their platforms because it goes against their rules and violations. And as we know, even just one voice in the country could ignite hundreds of thousands of people to maybe believe things that aren't necessarily true. Many of those people migrated over to podcasting because there isn't those set terms of you're breaking our rules and regulations necessarily. Or if they are, they think or hope that they won't be listened to and get caught. Sort of like people using an AC/DC song to open up their show, their podcast. They're not supposed to be using that music, but they think, well, who's really listening? Maybe we'll get away with it. Sometimes it goes under the cracks. So it's an interesting thought of how far should Apple or Spotify or SiriusXM and Pandora go to make sure that if the content is vitriol that they don't want on their platforms, is it up to them to manage that sort of thing, to make sure that that's not happening on their platforms, to get rid of their shows, or does it fall under the discussion of free speech and those voices need or should be heard no matter what those voices are saying or how incorrect they might be saying those sorts of things? I'm sure there's a ton of algorithms that Apple and Spotify, et cetera, can use to do this sort of thing. If they hear something being said that's against what they believe, they might just say, hey, cease and desist, we're getting rid of your show. I don't know how far over the line they should step, how they should straddle the line. It's interesting to think of where we are now, word-wise, social media-wise, and this has been building for many years as to how much is too much, how much are you able to say on a certain platform before it becomes, well, somebody needs to draw the line. So I think Apple and Spotify are trying to do their best to keep the worst off their platforms, but I don't know how far they're going to be able to go with that.
This was the headline, the clickbait was that extremists exploit a loophole in social moderation podcasts. This is about takedowns and deplatforming, which we've seen in podcasts before all these social media companies started taking down people for extreme views. But first of all, we've seen it, and now they're calling it a loophole. And again, I think that's clickbait. One of the beauties of podcasting is that it's open, right? So the difference is here. It's pretty simple. Like, if you are inciting people to do something where death results, these private companies, they're not going to keep on the platform. It's not happening. But you are not. Right. It's a private company. Free speech has nothing to do with private companies. It's not a free speech issue. They have their choice, and they are just not going to put essentially their money behind something that results in the death of other human beings. So they're going to remove what they're going to remove. But you, as a podcaster, can still have a feed, right? And so you could host it on your own site. And so this is, one of the things, podcasts are open, right? So this is also this debate against RSS versus platform. Like, if you're on Spotify, if you can only be found on Spotify, if you're an exclusive show, you're not really a podcast, because if Spotify then decides to remove you, you really are gone, right? You really are gone. If you're a podcast, you have an RSS feed and that lives anywhere. So, I think it really comes down to if you are going to go down, these companies are just not going to stand by for stuff that gets people hurt. I think that's what you're going to see. Like, so I don't know if, I think podcast is a loophole. It's open. You still have a podcast. They didn't take your podcast away. You can't do that.
Well, you see. Oh, go ahead, Dave.
Go ahead, York. No, you first.
Well, the thing is, I'm all for diversity and I think diversity is a good thing. The thing is, we also need to have diversity of thoughts, not just cultures, but of thoughts. What I mean by this is that, as far as I could see so far, if I were to say something on my show, not hateful against a certain group, but just, I guess, not fitting with the current culture of today's standards, then they may take my show off the air. They're running a risk when they're doing this by not allowing freedom of thought. Now, there was a show that I used to listen to, a radio show back in the day. It was his name is Art Bell, and he did a show called Coast to Coast. And I also listened to, I think his name is George Norrie. Now, they had really bizarre stuff on their show: government conspiracies, UFOs, 12 people taking over the entire world. It was really bizarre stuff, but they were allowed to do it. Now, most of the stuff, 99% of it, I disagreed with, but I listened every single night. Every single night, I listened to the show, and there was no foul play. No one said, "Okay, they're inciting violence. This is ridiculous." But now, with QAnon and different things that's going on, or flat earthers, which I disagree with, I still like to hear their opinions. But
I don't think we see platform remove shows that are just, I mean, there are plenty of conspiracy theories, these theory shows on these platforms. But again, all of those shows, it doesn't matter if, I mean, they're still available. They aren't, it's different than being removed. If you're taken off Twitter, you're gone, right? It's a different, Twitter's not open. It's proprietary. It's a closed place.
Yeah.
As long as you've got an RSS feed and a media host, or some sort of hosting, they really can't shut you down if you're a podcast. You just got to teach your audience how to copy and paste an RSS feed into their app, because you're not going to be found anymore. You have to do it manually. It's good. Your life is going to get harder.
You have a website. It's pretty simple. I mean, this is a reason to have a website, right? If you're worried about it, you better have a website, and you better be talking about it on every episode. So when you are removed, if you do something that gets you removed because you violated the terms of service, people know exactly where to go, right? Yeah. So have a website, have a domain, promote that. Other than promoting, don't promote Apple Podcasts. Don't push your whole audience to YouTube, because you podcasts, man, real lenient. I don't see this happening a ton in podcasting. YouTube will pull you for any reason, and they won't even tell you sometimes what it was. So, there are platforms where you put all your eggs in one basket. You could be gone, but podcasting is not really one of those. But Dave, even hosts have had to deal with this. Some podcast hosts like Libsyn, they get into, I think it's even more difficult than if you're an Apple. I get it. It's a huge corporate organization that has a media and a brand, but a host is sort of like, you paid us to be on our platform, you're paying us, and we're removing you. Like that's even tougher to me. When
I know Libsyn, I know Blueberry, even Rob, when he was at Spreaker, had to deal, because there's a terms of service that says, hey, you can't say hate speech, you can't do this, you can't do that, blah, blah. Like you said, you can't go around and say, I think we should kill everybody named Ray Ortega. You just can't say that. That's not good. And so it's pretty obvious, you get into gray areas as what is hate speech, but it's one of those things you're like, come on, we all know what hate speech is. And so when somebody does that, you go, yep, you broke our terms of service. I had somebody this week that emailed me like, hey, my show's not on Spotify. So I go over, I hit play on their episode. I fire up Shazam. Shazam goes, yep, I know that song. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure I know why you got kicked off of Spotify. And so he's really just, was not happy about it. And I was like, well, that's the terms. He goes, Spotify doesn't want you making a podcast with music in it. If people want to listen to music, they want you to listen to music. And so, there are terms of services. And when you cross the line, you'll get removed. The bottom line is don't invoke violence. Don't be a racist pig.
I mean, you can do what you want, but there are welcome to adulthood. Like, I mean, and so, but the rage over it is like, podcasts, if they call it a loophole, it's only because they're saying you actually can't just take away someone's microphone for them, because with a podcast, hopefully, and we went over this in the first roundtable ever, hopefully you have control, right? So this, again, as a podcaster, what to take away from this is that make sure you're in control of your stuff, make sure your audience knows where to find you. Again, RSS is beautiful because it's open. So,
well, and to York's point, he's one of the things I think we do need more of is, they used to call it, started with a D. What was it? Oh, that's right. Dialogue, where people actually voice different opinions. And on occasion, there was this thing started with an L. Oh, that was right. Learning would happen where you'd go, oh, I didn't know that. Huh. And now you would change. And now it's,
I suspect there's a lot of that out there. And maybe this is a place where Apple could help with the spotlight, right? If Apple wants to encourage better dialogue, healthier conversation, different points of views, this is one place they could focus their spotlight, right? So, because I do think, Spotify would tell you there's 2 million podcasts in Spotify. I don't know where they get their numbers from. I think it's just duplicates. But, what is it, Dave? We're over 1 million podcasts in Apple, right? Something like that. Anyways, think of that number. Like this is happening in our space. Finding it might be harder, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But if we went to podcastindustryinsights.com, which of course is Daniel's new site that we're now shamelessly plugging, we could see exactly how many podcasts are in Apple Podcasts. But it's going to be interesting to see. I know, I don't know what it's part of. I just know it's Section 230 of some sort of act in Congress that they were seriously looking at, which was going to, because right now Facebook isn't responsible. Basically, because if you remove that, if like now Libsyn is responsible for everything on its platform, and so is YouTube, which gets like what, a bazillion hours of video every millisecond, then kiss them goodbye, because you can't police these big platforms if they've got to go through a checklist for every second that gets loaded, and then goodbye any kind of free speech. So.
And then you'll be doing what we say you shouldn't do, and that's you'll be buying a little server, and you'll be hosting your own podcast. And when you go popular, you're gonna owe.
The Communication Decency Act is what we're hearing from the chat room here. That's where Section 230 comes from. So, write your local congressman. Suddenly, we've turned into Meet the Press.
You got an opinion? Get involved. Don't just say it in a microphone where no one's listening and you're not allowed to podcast. Get involved.
But just to go back to your point of you can freedom of speech. It's there. You can scream movie in a crowded firehouse if you want to. Wait, I think I got that backwards. But it's. I remember there was a show, PK and J. We're talking early 2006, and the guy. And I say this in a loving way, was not just a atheist. He was a flaming atheist, like diehard. If you're not an atheist, you're an idiot kind of guy. And his job heard his podcast and said, yeah, we don't think you're now he never mentioned who he worked for, never, like, nothing, but they just kind of went, ooh, that's how you really are. Yeah, never mind. See ya. Bye. And he got fired from what he said on his podcast. So he was free to say it. It just cost him his job. So
you have to take responsibility of the things that you say. Definitely, freedom of speech, but there's also then you're responsible. But just to go back to my point, I don't want there to be a time, and probably some people would say the time is now, when you can't voice a political opinion that's not popular. Not talking about expressing hatred towards any group, but just your worldview. So there needs to be healthy discussions back and forth. And if somebody is making a really ridiculous point, then you could listen on, or you could just switch to somebody else. But there's a lot of deplatforming going on, and we have to take I think there's an overcorrection right now that's going on in our society. I know in the States there is. I'm in good old Canada. Some of that is happening here as well, but especially in the States, where in order to correct the injustices, where there seems to be, or you guys, or Americans, I guess I should say, seems to be going a little bit overboard. Rather than just saying, okay, you're expressing a different opinion, so your views are you are a hateful person for saying this. Probably not so. Probably some of them are, but probably some of them are not, and everyone needs to be given a fair shot.
Yeah, I don't see this happening in podcasts. Honestly, I don't see this being. I don't see a rash of deplatforming a podcast just because you have a different point of view. Those shows there are plenty out there. So maybe this is other. Yeah. Maybe this is a bigger issue on other platforms. Again, like Twitter, like things that are closed gardens where you can't, or walled gardens, whatever that is. A podcast, I do not. I still see.
I think you're right, Ray. I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right. It hasn't come into podcasting too much. Facebook, Twitter, those places, yes, but right now, at least podcasting is probably the freest, newest medium available to really express our views to people.
And it has been for the last 15 years, whatever we've been going. Like podcast has been, a place where, in theory, anyone can sort of get their voice out to the world, right? You can do that on social media, but again, podcast is open for most people to be able to start one and keep going. It's only up to you to keep going, right? It's you're not at the mercy of someone else, right? You might not be available everywhere, and that could be again a different conversation, which apparently we need to have Bangs on to have, because he's very very adamant in the chat. So we don't always get all the people we need, but this is good. So bring it up, and we can continue the conversation. Ray at podcasterroundtable.com, and then we can bring you back and we can broaden this conversation. No reason. It's utter garbage to him. We've had a terrible conversation, but again, you look, people, when you make people mad, sometimes those are your best episodes. You're doing something right. So he's involved, so maybe he'll be involved more. We'll bring him on. Anyways, we're good, man. We've hit an hour. We've gotten through a good. We don't usually get through.
Yeah, I'm gonna say usually we get through like 2 stories and that's it.
I left one on the table, which I did make a joke about. But podcast being 20 years old, there was and I'll just bring it up real quick, and that it's the story of the first podcast feed, and this was written by some Pod News, written by Eric Newsman, who is he worked
at NPR.
And NPR, he got NPR in podcasting like 2005. So yeah, pretty well known in the nerd podcast space. Like if you follow this show, you probably heard the name. But he's telling the story that back in July 9th, or that the first podcast feed was actually in 2001, and it has to do with Dave Weiner basically testing the podcast feed with the most ironic example, as John mentioned. He put a Grateful Dead song into a feed, basically see if it works. And then podcasting sort of just sat around. No one did anything with it. Kind of he did nothing with it until he got to Harvard in 2003. And he was working with Christopher Lydon. He got him to do an actual show. So July 9th, 2003 is typically where us nerds go harken back to the first podcast, because as he says in the article, there's no doubt that Lydon's interview recording was the first original production made specifically for podcasting. And then this even spilled into Twitter with Dave Weiner and some of our friends, Todd and Rob, and just arguing about like, this is one of those like mini USB-C versus micro USB. Like it just sets people off, right? So, so technically maybe podcasting is 20 years old. You're not going to see a celebration of that, I don't think, because again, it's widely sort of celebrated as being closer to 2003, but everyone's got a different idea. So we're about 17 and a half years old. But to celebrate 20 years would be weird, since it's never really something that's acknowledged as like the date. So maybe technically it exists. We won't even get into the origin of the word podcast.
That's a whole other argument.
Crazier. And to be honest with you, I don't think that one's nailed down, because I've tried to nail that down And I've heard Dave Weiner himself say two different things. So, and Dave, if you want to come on and tell us the story, that'd be awesome. I read the blog post. It's not easy to find, but anyways, Dave, does this make you want to spit fire? Does this get to you?
I thought about this. What if somebody came up to you, like I'm 55, and said, "Hey, I know you think you're 55. You're actually 59." I'd be like,
bummer.
I'm in pretty good shape then for 59 in some ways. That's one way of looking at it. Or I don't know. To me, I just was like, I thought like, what's the worst thing that happens here? Oh, we're 4 years. Either A, we're not. If you thought we weren't far enough along for being 16, you're probably really disappointed that we're at this point and we're 20. So I don't know. It was just, to me, I was kind of like, I don't know. I got other things to,
My favorite thing is that the first thing in a podcast feed ever was a copywritten song. Just dead from the start. It just, you want to be deplatformed, play that AC/DC.
There you go.
So check out that article. You might find it interesting. There's, I always find it fascinating to hear from the people who were there, who created this stuff, to hear their words about how it all happened. So I think at the very least, you'll get some of that. You might get some of that from the article. It's interesting to hear from, Dave and Adam in a hotel room, and how podcasting really kind of emerged and where we're at now, which is just, it's kind of crazy town. I mean, it's awesome. And we are, we got our driver's license. We might be closer to drinking than we thought. And, and I think we're doing pretty good. So,
yeah. And you'll even see in that article, or at least on Twitter, where at some point Eric, and I think it was Todd, just said, okay, we're going to agree to disagree on this. Because Todd wrote the first book. Todd Cochran wrote the very first book on podcasting, and he did a history check, and he had fact checkers and this and that. And according to Todd, it's 2004. And Eric is talking to Dave Weiner, who was one of the guys that, wrote the tech for podcasting. And he's saying, nope, it's whatever it was, 2000. So yeah, 2000, because that would make us 20, right? Or 2001.
2001.
Yeah. So
yeah, it's about 20 years. And when I read the tweet, I guess the tweet war back and forth, it was amusing. It was educational. Some people may look at it and say, oh my goodness, what is the point of this? They're just going back and forth, arguing about the date. But it's always good to think twice about it. And I did. I read through the arguments. I guess historical facts is important. Yeah, you have to know where you started and how to know, I guess, where you're going to. So, but we're here now, and we're doing great things. If it's 16 years or 20 years, we're still doing great things, and we just need to look towards the future of how we're going to take the industry, how we're going to move forward, all of us together.
Know your history, and then create your own. So, the good thing is we're still around. Like Dave, when you started, when it started practically, and you're still here, and the channel is still here. And not only is it still here, it's now part of like the lexicon, right? Like we know, we don't deal with the what's a podcast anymore. I think Fred or someone in the chat made a joke about what's a podcast a lot earlier, but we don't really deal with that now, right? If you just say, oh, I'm listening to this great podcast, people aren't going to be like, what are you talking about? In most cases, and we still have room to grow. There's plenty of people who don't know, but there was a day where we started those conversations by explaining what the heck we were talking about. And now, everyone's got a podcast as well.
That's a fascinating evolution, especially for your guys' show, from episode 1 to now 500 parentheses 153 is how much more knowledge people have of this platform. And it's interesting how people view it, because I'm someone that sometimes would like shorter podcasts depending on what I'm doing. So if I'm going into work, which we once used to do back in March of 2020, I would have a 2-hour plus commute getting in and out of the city. So I could listen to hour-long shows, multiple hour-long shows, and get through 4 or 5 listening to them a little bit faster. But when you're home, then you start wondering, well, I wish these were 15, 20 minutes, a half hour. How are these people going to be successful doing hour-long podcasts, 2-hour-long podcasts? But now it's evolved to where people use their podcasts as you would a radio show. They're not going into the car and turning on whatever channel it might be. They're turning on their favorite podcast. They're listening to that when they drive to and from work. So the evolution of the shows from, should we keep them short? Is this too long? Is this Grateful Dead song that's going to be 22 minutes long because it's the live version worthy of being the first podcast? Should we make it a little bit shorter, maybe a 3.5-minute version? How everything has moved to, if people want to hear you and they're listening for as long as you're putting out your content, keep at it, because it doesn't matter if it's 20 minutes, if it's 2 hours, if people are listening, they obviously like what you're doing. So there's really no rhyme or reason for how you should go about it. It is nice that people at least know what podcasting is now.
Yeah, I was watching, there's a show on CBS called The Unicorn about a guy in his 50s who's nervous about getting back into the dating pool. Have no idea why I identify with the show. And he was saying something and he just blah, blah, blah. And he's like, oh, well, that should be a podcast. And I giggled. I was like, it's so cool that people just do that now. Because I remember when there was no way you could do that. Because people were like, wait, what? A pod? Who? Do I need an iPod for that?
Every box, every can, every wrapper has every company's Twitter handle, right? Or Twitter icon, Facebook logo. Like when social media finally broke and every brand put their social on their thing, right? Now major, like television, right, would be still considered like this holy grail, mostly because it's almost impossible, very, not a lot of content comes from television. So very limited supply. So, you're seeing all these new shows, they mention their podcast now, right? I'm sure a lot of radio shows are probably mentioning their podcast. Like it's just, it's baked into everything now, which is fantastic.
Yeah. And I don't listen to a lot of radio, but when I do, what I do hear is a promotion. If I'm on a radio.com station, listen on the radio.com where you also get podcasts. And if I'm listening to another station and it's iHeart, they're going to iHeart Radio, #1 in podcasts. And I'm like, no, you're not. Stop. And then they always have, I can get the best music and all my podcasts in one place. And I'm like, ugh. So,
hey, they can be the #1 in podcasts. We can be on round 500. So we're going to get out of here. We'll see you next time for round 501. But as we go out, let us know where we can find your podcast. I suggest a website just in case you get deplatformed, and then we'll get out of here. So, John, thank you so much for joining us for your first roundtable.
Ray, it's a pleasure. Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it. Long time listener, first time caller, as they say. So it was nice to get to chat it up with you guys. You can find my podcast at londonbridge.com. That's LUNDIN, Bridge, common spelling. I'm also on Twitter under that same handle as well. The Bridge Sports Podcast, which was semi-retired in about 2018. Once I got into the radio business, I figured I should probably focus on that, not so much doing the sports thing for fun. Now I do the New Report, Old Report, which is a sports talk show once a week that gets into whatever's happening in the real world. So you can find both those there.
Very cool. Awesome. And York, where can we find your show?
My show, Poetic Earthlings, you could find it at poeticearthlings.com. I also produce another show. The host is Brent Stark, and he has a show called The Most Precious Commodity. So I'm the producer of this show. And for my show, Poetic Earthlings, you can find it once again on poeticearthlings.com.
Yeah, thanks for joining for your first roundtable. Again, once a roundtable, always a roundtabler. We can have you back. And if you want to be on the roundtable, Dave, I haven't forgot you. Roundtable.com/guest, and then we'll get you on the show. I probably took too long with John, but York, I think you contacted me fairly. I think you recently signed up, right? Or maybe, oh no, you contacted me. See, York's a great example. Contacted me, wanted to be on the show, and that he had been on the list for a while. And that's a great way to get back on the radar, because there's a lot on the list, and if sometimes it gets old. And so to know you're still out there and still podcasting, that's what I usually check. Do they still have a podcast? And so York did, so we got you on. So thanks, York, for your patience. If you sign up to the list, you should get a form that lets you put your name and then like topics. It's kind of an old format, but it doesn't hurt to have topics on there, because then I kind of get a vibe for what you guys can talk about or want to talk about, even though it's not required. It does help. And if you don't get on that, get a hold of me, just like York did. So it works. Dave Jackson, co-host. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks. This was a fun night. You can find me, Dave Jackson, over at schoolofpodcasting.com, where I help you plan, launch, and grow your podcast.
Always waiting to see which website Dave gives us. Dave, this is round 500. You could have given us half of your websites by now.
That's right.
You should plug a different URL.
Episode 500, Ray. This is we all have them memorized by now.
Yeah.
No worries.
I've messed up somebody's world. But if you're still listening, that's good. Reach out. That's awesome. Thank you so much. All right. The chat rocked it too. Martin, Bangs, Kim. There are a couple names I'm not sure I've seen before. So that's very cool.
Yeah.
Daniel, of course, is in there. Check out Daniel's new stuff. Dan, what was that?
Podcastindustryinsights.com.
You gotta be a big wig for that one, I think. He's gotten into like product for industry, and that's what it says.
Yeah.
So, but some good stats there. Go find out how many podcasts exist. All right, we'll see you next time for actual round 154. And thanks for joining. Wave goodbye. See you guys.
Take care.